Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Robert Prevost, a member of the North American Dogman Project science team. Yes, it is always good to nerd out and talk science here on Midnight Lycanthropy on LordeStarfox Radio. Much better. I'm sorry, I felt a little bit weak and under the weather, but now that I am fully revamped, recharged, and ready to rumble, let's take a walk into the darkness.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf, and everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night, yes, I see you have found your way through the darkness of the forest and back around the late night fire to burn the midnight timber with Robert Prevost. Yes, you've heard that name before. He is a member of the North American Dogman Project science team. And we are going to once again read a few chapters from the Midnight Society book and try to figure out what is occurring. Because remember, science, yes, that's what LordeStarfox is all about. Robert, how you doing, man?
Hey, LordeStarfox. Hey there, true believers. How's everybody doing tonight?
Been busy, but in a good way, my friend, except for my own self-inflicted wound with editing where I updated without saving, and like I told you, had to redo something for way too many times. But other than that, great stuff, man. What have you been up to?
Similar stuff where, the struggle is real whenever you're doing these kind of shows and you're doing editing. You've got a lot of scheduling issues. Trying to get people on. You got to deal with your own real life, their real life. Trying to find free time in between work, family, and everything else to try and, sketch out an hour here and there to sit and talk about fun stuff with fun people and, just life in general, just having fun.
It's great stuff right there, my friend. And as I had previously mentioned, you are part of our science team. Would you like to give yourself a plug?
Sure, why not? I've got a background in biology, ecology, evolution, genetics. Went to college at Arkansas State University, got my degree there. Background, 20 plus years in cryptozoology. I started out with cryptozoology.com, which is no longer around, unfortunately. They were an awesome website to be a part of. Have a background in very flesh and blood scientific approach. That's the whole reason I actually went to college. Was because of cryptozoology. Cryptozoology got me interested in biology, so it's kind of funny. But I've always been a fan of Bigfoot and other cryptids and things like that. Got into Dogman a few years back, then hooked in with LordeStarfox and North American Dogman Project. Absolutely love my brotherhood there. Couldn't be happier with that group. Do a lot of independent investigation and research. I'm in Arkansas. I do a lot of stuff in Missouri and Arkansas as far as working with cryptids and investigations. I do writing. I've got one book out that's on Amazon. It's Monstrous Arkansas, a field guide to monster. Oh, where's that? I got a copy right here. Monstrous Arkansas, a field guide to unknown and mysterious beings in the natural state, which came out last year. And I'm working on Animology 101, which is basically a how-to guide to do research and investigations in the field. So, yeah, that's enough of a plug. I'm a busy guy. Plus, I have my monstrous podcast going on all the time.
It's beautiful stuff right there, man. And I appreciate you and all that you are conquering right there. And, man, I believe in logic and science. And like I always tell people, I'm willing to change my views on things if the beautiful minds that have helped me create my scientific view can then change my mind. It doesn't have to be the same great minds, but I need other people or them to show me reasons, to not then buy into the scientific side. So I always try to be logical about things. And I feel like it's so funny because people, oh, StarFox, you don't just believe their story. And I'm like, no. And then I always have to explain why human testimonial is not good. And then people are like, well, you're squashing people's voices. No, I'm not. There's plenty of other people out there that you just want to go and talk to that will just talk to you. I am not going to do that unless I can have some things to back up, what's occurring and how to approach it. And here's a prime example for you. Ready? Sea monsters. Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty scary. Well, sea monster, basically, let's put it in terminologies of simplistic, means anything we didn't understand was in the water that was large swimming around, because we're talking about like the 1800s, 1700s here. So, I mean, again, let's not you, but people in general, let's just be logic about things at some point in time before we start jumping into the absolute illogic. I mean, has anyone heard about the bobbit worm, for example? We're talking about Dogman tonight, but this is just to show you about being logic here. All right, most people wouldn't really know this thing existed. Well, guess what? It's been around since, 20 million years ago. So before then, but that's the oldest records we can back this thing up with. But we don't really know too much what happens when it goes down in its burrow. So what it looks like is something out of Tremors that chills on the bottom of the ocean and boom, takes something much large and pulls it down into its den. Sometimes even chops it in half. Well, recently there was an aquarium that couldn't figure out why the heck all this coral was being destroyed, relocated like a little construction site, and why some of their exotic special fish were just missing. So it kept going on, and eventually they're like, dude, okay, we're going to put up some surveillance. Couldn't figure out what's going on. They're like, all right, well, what the heck? So then they set up traps. Then the hooks and the traps were going missing and not working. So they're like, dude, what the Christmas trees? And they drain this whole entire aquarium. And sure enough, they find like a really large botworm that was living underneath the sand. And once they drained it, they were like, what the heck? This was responsible for removing all the coral and the reconstruction and the taking of the large fish and such. And they were like, what the heck? So it must have come in when it was in baby form inside of its little egg sac on some of this coral, and they put it in there. Pretty interesting stuff. And like I said, I know it does take large fish. I mean, some of the examples they were showing were salmon. I mean, pretty large fish for this parasitic worm to be taking. So again, though, pretty interesting stuff. And people would have never thought that existed or would have called that some crazy, sea monster, but it's logically been here for 20 million years and they're not fully sure into what category it falls into. But again, I love science, so there's just some pretty cool stuff for you, man.
Exactly. So, when it comes to sea monsters, that's kind of like a sea monster kind of falls into the biological realm of what you would think a UFO is. A UFO is an unidentified flying object, or a UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. So in a lot of ways, you could say that a sea monster is a underwater biological unidentified creature. So we know that we have things like, giant squids. We know that there are species of whale that maybe we haven't even identified yet. And there's possibilities that there are going to be sharks that we haven't identified yet that are much larger or as big as, the basking sharks and things. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be huge megalodons and all this. And it doesn't mean that there's plesiosaurs and everything else swimming around out in the ocean, but it doesn't mean that there isn't. The thing is that we have to use science. We have to go out there and we have to look. With a body of water like the ocean, we know less about the ocean than we do about our solar system, which is kind of crazy because you would think we would spend a little bit of time learning our own planet before we start going in and trying to explore other planets. But, well, apparently we didn't do that. So we need to spend some time and, science, that big word that everybody seems to hate except for you and me. We need to use that and go into the oceans, and we need to spend some time, and we need to look at things, like octopus. The octopus, or all the octopi, they're cephalopods that scientists will even tell you, if there was going to be a creature on the planet that maybe came from another world, it's the octopi.
Mm-hmm.
The blood of the octopus is copper-based. Ours is iron-based. Their blood is blue. Ours is red. They have more than one heart. They have more than one brain. They have, they have capabilities that we wish we had, as far as being able to cloak and change their skin, and chromatophores in their skin, and being able to change things in their shape. And they're the ideal alien, but they're here from Earth as far as we know. There's so many different creatures that live in the ocean. And like you were talking about worms, everybody thinks about, when we think about worms, we think about earthworms or flatworms or whatever. The ocean is actually full of different types of worms. There's a lot of those different kinds of creatures that are in the ocean. We need to spend more time looking at our own Earth. There's a lot of stuff that's undiscovered. That's what's so cool about cryptids and cryptozoology.
Beautifully stated, and that's going to lead us into tonight what we're talking about, because they know even less about cave systems than they do the ocean and outer space, which is even more bonkers. And, like I always state, who knows really what's down there and what's occurring? And again, I never deal in hundreds of anything, but I'm pretty optimistic, maybe upper 80s, lower 90s, that if access and capability of getting really deep into cave systems and finding our ways back out, because like Meku, our spelunker and paleontologist expert, says only 10% of caves that we know of reconnect to the surface. So that's a big task in general. But if we were able to, again, I'm really optimistic, we would be finding people, not necessarily their remains, but backpacks and missing stuff. I do think the cave systems have something very much to do with what's occurring. And like you just said, with the ocean, we're finding new things. On land, we still find new things. Now, the cave system, there has to be something occurring there. And when you dive back in history, you have a lot of interesting mentions of, well, like we had spoken as before, dog-headed people or gods, etc. But there's a lot of times where it seems pretty cut and dry when they were seeing it, I guess, real, and then trying to, I wouldn't say glorify it, but then put it more into the god realm, meaning like the Nordics and Fenrir. Pretty optimistic. They didn't think Fenrir was necessarily in this realm. It was in Ragnarok, but they did have berserkers and such, and some claims of things that were happening more or less in this realm. So the distinction was there. I don't think they ever thought Fenrir was a raging werewolf. I think they believed it occurred, or that type of stuff was tied into the afterlife. Yet, when you look at the same thing, other cultures, well, they seem to know the differences. Again, I mean, King Lycan arguably could be listed more as like the goddish type, thing, because it was having delvins with Zeus and etc. But then you have, the cynocephali again, which are big differences. And I don't think the Greeks and Romans ever tried to say King Lycan was here, in our realm necessarily, whereas numerous times they mention the cynocephali. So when you go to ancient Egypt, same thing now. You have Anubis. Well, I am one to try to understand and look outside of the box of what's occurring here,
Mm-hmm.
but the gods they speak of and such, well, obviously some of them are pretty intriguing and pretty elaborate. I don't see how any of those could be existing as something that we haven't discovered yet. But again, I am covering the missing person issue, and I have a lot of different, opinions, which people can listen to on previous episodes where Robert and I talk about like the Dogman and such. And he does kind of fall into the category a little bit of a cynocephaly, more or less. So could he have been one that somehow showed the Egyptians some things they didn't fully understand, or basically showed dominance where they're like, what the heck? And then they put him on a pedestal? Or does he completely fall, into the absolutely mythology aspect where there's not much to, I guess, state whether or not he was real? I mean, he's based off of jackals, and a lot of people don't realize that he isn't good nor evil. He is a tweener. Wait, what? Yes, he would bring people's bodies to the afterlife, but what did they have to do to get him to do that? Because most of the time, him and his jackals were consuming the deceased, and they're looked upon as a scary entity and beings. So again, it's kind of really interesting. He's not good nor evil, and I don't know. I just thought you would have some pretty interesting takes on that stuff, man.
Well, the thing about Anubis that a lot of people don't realize is, everybody, when you think of Anubis, you think of this anthropomorphic, half jackal, half human that, is pretty popular whenever you look at hieroglyphics. But whenever you go back further in centuries in Egyptian hieroglyphics, Anubis actually shows up originally as a jackal. He's not half human, half jackal. He's completely jackal. Horus, the same way, is originally a falcon. Khonshu, the different ones like that. Thoth, Bastet. And then it kind of evolved. It became something where in order for them to be gods, they had to have a persona that was both human and animal, neither, and much higher than us. That's why in most hieroglyphics, they're portrayed as being much taller, much bigger. That's showing power. A lot of people are like, they look at hieroglyphics and is like, oh, those were giants because look at how much bigger they are. That's not what the hieroglyphics are trying to get across. They're trying to show that they're more powerful. The only way that we could show that they were more powerful was to draw them larger. It's kind of like the Hulk, in comic books. You draw him as a great big hulking beast to show that he's much more powerful. He is bigger, but his strength is what's shown through in the comic books. You have to take away some of the literal translation of it. But when you look at, Anubis as being like one of the cynocephali, I kind of have problems with that because you have, like I just said, Anubis, Bastet, Horus, Khonshu. You look at Thoth. There's several different ones. A lot of them, their names are really hard to pronounce whenever you get into it, and I'll get tongue-tied and I'll just sound silly. But all of them are part human, part animals. So if you're going to say that one is a literal translation, where you have the cyanocephaly, then you have to say, well, Horus must mean that there were people with falcon heads that were roaming around. And no, you don't hear anybody talking about that. Or Bastet means that there are cat-headed people running. Or Thoth, there's these people that have the heads of cranes and stuff like that. And then there's ones that have the heads of mice and things like, So, I mean, it goes on and on and on. So what they are is a representation of power and authority. And like you were talking about with Anubis is neither good nor bad, simply serves a purpose. It's a force. It's a part of nature. It's something that's inevitable.
That's great stuff right there, man. And I couldn't agree more because it's like some of our other science members were speaking about the other night, just this perspective of things, I mean, obviously it comes and takes something away. So whether it's human or a sickness or something, oh, it's so evil. But that's just not how it's being looked upon. I mean, no animal is looking upon human as that's something to destroy their family or a food source. And does that make the animal evil? No, because the animal doesn't have rules that they set upon like you and I do that we think everything follows by. So totally great stuff right there. And again, because I'm about science, people for a while and still try to throw around things that we know are hoaxes. It's
Yeah.
pretty painful in the Dogman community, unfortunately. But even in the pyramids, well, there was recently some depictions that were found that people were like, oh, look at this. It's an actual helicopter or things like this. And sure, that did kind of look like a helicopter and potentially maybe a tank was the other reference. But then you bring all the specialists in. All right, when you bury a pharaoh and it's something that is important to them, right?
Mhm.
That's over the inside of their burial aspects. So something so important as a reference to a new age helicopter and tank would not be in a tiny corner on the top of their burial spot. And over time, what happens is whenever pharaoh or person, it's not necessarily their burial site, but it's before you'd go into it. So the next pharaoh in line would come in and redo all that artwork more or less, and their depictions of what they thought was important. So they would put over a plaster basically over top of that, and we know nothing lasts forever. So as these things fall away, right, the plaster kind of, it then would distort a little bit of the image underneath, and then depict something that might look a little bit different, because again, there was no references in any other points in time in any other temples in the Egyptian culture that talked about Apache helicopters and tanks, except for this one little spot in the corner. And like everyone, in my opinion, that's using science and logic would say, again, if that was something of importance, which you can blatantly see in all the other temples, what was of importance, it's all over the place.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, it was pretty common practice, like you were talking about, for the next pharaoh to come up, or a pharaoh who didn't like the pharaoh before him, which was usually his father or grandfather or uncle or something like that, that he would, they would go in and they would pretty much deface everything that he had done.
Mm-hmm.
And they would come in and they would put up their own stuff. I think it's Akhenaten was the one who was considered pretty weird looking or whatever, and a lot of the stuff that happened with him, a lot of stuff was defaced as far as who he was and what he looked like and everything. And they stripped away a lot of stuff, and the next pharaoh up above that came up after him, just kind of, yeah, we're going to erase that person from history, which in a lot of ways was a way of trying to erase them from the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and we have to be careful of interpretation. We get on a kick, whether it's Dogman or Sasquatch or trying to prove that alien life exists, or the whole chariot of the gods type thing. We get on a kick of looking at so-called evidence, and we look at it with a bias, and we decide everything that we're looking at has to do with what we're interested in and what we're trying to prove, and we have to be very careful not to do that. Because this next person who comes along may be trying to disprove everything that we just tried to prove, and they'll use the same stuff to disprove it. We have to approach it and let the evidence tell us what the evidence is. In my group, matter of fact, just had a picture from a game camera. We have an investigation area where we're working on trying to gather information and evidence on Sasquatch. And I have a game camera up, and there was an odd picture that came up, so I shared it with the group, and I put together a composite photo showing one day where nothing happened, and one hunter friends walked by, and then one day where this anomaly took place. And sure enough, after a little bit of time looking at it, I realized at the bottom there's a deer in the picture, And then I couldn't tell what the other anomaly up above the deer was. Well, me and the hunter who I work with, we were speculating, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And then later that day, we got another picture in from the same camera, and that same object was still there. Well, if it's Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever, it's not going to still be there. So it's a fixed limb or a tree trunk or a leaf or something that's in the woods in that exact same spot. So we have to be careful. We have to let the evidence be the evidence and then learn how to interpret it without bias.
Great stuff right there, my friend. And people just for some reason don't want to be logical about things in regards to that, because like I said, there's definitely a big difference when you see a culture, I feel like, mention something that is spiritual and then something not, meaning like in the indigenous cultures, they definitely know the difference between a skinwalker and a dogman and such, and they seem to swear up and down that the dogman and Bigfoot are out in the forest and that skinwalker is basically like, more or less selling your soul. There's way more to it, but we're not here to talk about that. So that's just a pretty broad term of it. So I mean, they definitely knew the differences between that for sure. So do you think that when it comes to, I don't know, like the Romans, so whether it was Herodotus and Ctesias or Alexander the Great, and then the Vikings, and then also the other culture over in Europe and also India over there, all these cultures, do you think, and the Aztecs and the Mayans, were they exaggerating on this, or was there something there that they knew or they were seeing, or do you think this was being used more as, I wouldn't say entertainment, but basically storytelling, etc.?
Well, I think first of all we have to be careful we don't pull a missing 411. And what I mean by that is we don't take all these individual cases and lump them into one thing and try to make them look like they all have an interconnection when they may not. Because unfortunately that's kind of what happened with the 411 missing 411 stuff. There was kind of this, there must be this one thing or these several things that are out in the forest that are taking everybody. And when you take all the cases and you look at them individually, a lot of them have a lot of answers to them. Now, I'm not saying there aren't things in the forest that are taking people. Let me correct that. So let's back up. Let's look at the Vikings first. So when you're looking at the Vikings and you had a series of warriors who were the berserkers and some other ones who basically they felt like they, through ritual and everything, took on the persona, the strength of the bear or the wolf in battle. And that they weren't really bear people, wolf people. They were, they had the strength. They convinced themselves they had the strength of bears. The veracity of a bear or a wolf. They wore the hide, or basically it's a scare tactic, just like in World War II where we had the fighter jets that had the shark's teeth, painted on the front and everything to scare the Japanese. It was shock and awe. We're going to come in there and we're just going to scare the holy crud out of you. So a lot of times once you saw berserkers, simply because of the stories that were told about the berserkers, as soon as they started hitting the shoreline, villagers were running already and they dropped their weapons. So yeah, it's kind of like when you see the special forces walking with their berets on, you're like, oh crap, here come the green berets or whatever. So there's that. When you get into the cyanocephaly in Roman and that area, we have accounts that come from the Catholic Church and other areas, and we kind of have to go with that because a lot of that comes from Saint Christopher, or not Saint Christopher. I'm sorry, I think maybe it is Saint Christopher. I can't remember, but anyway. And they talked about him being, the dog-headed saint or whatever. Well, the weird thing is he's sometimes portrayed as being like that, and sometimes he's not. So either he is this dog-headed guy or he's not a dog-headed guy. So then what we had to do was dig into that a little bit and why why was he sometimes portrayed as that? Well, what they said is that he came from a race of people from Canaan, originally from Canaan. And the word Canaan and the word for dogs or wolves is very similar. And somewhere in there was possibly a mistranslation, and that was made into, anybody from the land of Canaan was Canine. And they also would say that the people from Canaan were warlike, were cannibalistic. And, it was kind of almost a racist slang to say that they were these dog-headed people, that they were these beasts. So, it wasn't necessarily a good thing to say that that somebody was cyanocephaly. Not that they really used that term back then. They were just kind of dog-headed people. So yeah, there's a lot of hits and misses on that one. As far as that being an actual thing, I doubt it very seriously. Once a myth or, a story starts, they love to run with it. When we get into the Aztecs, and you also have, so you have the Egyptians, the Aztecs, you have the ancient Chinese, the Japanese, all of these different cultures, the Africans, and everybody kind of has these werebeasts that show up. This is kind of like whenever you get into dragons, giants, unicorns, giant serpents, water serpents, giant birds. They're kind of a universal thing. It kind of pops up over and over and over again. So the idea of a were dog, a were hyena, a were lion, different were creatures is kind of going to pop up over and over because we like to humanize or anthropomorphize animals into making monsters and making gods. Now, it's not that we didn't run into strange things. We still run into strange things today that we can't explain. So, myth and legend has a root in reality. So there's a possibility they ran into weird stuff. But we also have to take into account that some of that is just simply their way of telling a story.
That's great stuff right there, man, for sure. And super interesting just to try to put the thought process on that and really try to peel back the layers. And here's something pretty interesting for you too, which you probably already know this, but I'm a nerd and I love to learn. Full moons, nothing to do with the actual werewolf in general lore. Wait, what, StarFox? Yeah, look it up. I mean, any animal also comes out on the full moon, has nothing to do with it. And nor do silver bullets. Wait, what? No. Ironically, the gentleman that shot this large, what we believe was a spotted hyena or something along the lines of that, happened to just have a silver bullet. So again, previous to all that though, never mentioned at all. And that's all also something more of a Hollywood modern kind of take on things too. So that's why I like to dive into the historical aspects and just try to figure out where or potentially what be occurring with this. I mean, I do have, the belief and aspects where some of these supposed prehistoric animals, were that we thought extinct actually aren't. But again, like you were talking about with some of the were people, what about the leopard group that was down in Africa? I can't fully remember what the term was, but they were pretty much like an elite group of supposedly assassin type members that were called the leopard people. Have you ever heard of that as well?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I can't remember it either. I think I mentioned to you once before, there's a book that we all need to get a copy of. It's called Human Animals. I used to have a copy of it years ago, and it talked about them as well. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I cannot think of their name for anything. But, a leopard is considered to be a pretty human devouring monster of its own down in Africa. More people are probably attacked by leopards than they are lions and hyenas and things like that. But yeah, the idea that this thing that can sneak around in the night and without any knowledge is taking out people. It's kind of like the African version of a ninja. So yeah, pretty scary stuff.
It is pretty scary stuff, and I don't know much about the biblical side of things because I'm spiritual, but
Mhm.
everyone that has introduced me to some of the stories in there and such because they specialize in that. Actually, Dennis Carroll, one of our science members, spends a lot of time diving into that, but he had told me, I can't fully remember, but also there were supposedly lion-headed people as well that are mentioned at a point in time, which is interesting because when you hear some of the supposed Dogman encounters, they are, referred to as potentially having more of a feline head. Have you heard that before?
Yes, I actually have.
Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit? Because that's all I know about any of that. Is again, it's
I'm probably not too much more versed in that right now than you are. I do remember that there is some. That's like when you get into India and China, there are tiger people or tiger-headed people. Um, Russia has some of the tiger, some of the bear, some of the wolf stuff. It kind of depends on where you are and what the apex predator is in the area. That that kind of gets adapted into the folklore and the mythology as far as what the animal is going to be. I think the wolf is probably the most common one because we've always had kind of this love-hate relationship with canids. The wolf we've always feared. We have the sheep that are in the field. We always have the shepherd who is watching over to try and protect us from the wolf. In the Bible, many times Satan is depicted as a wolf, and we are the sheep. Jesus is the shepherd. So there's this love hate with the wolf. We tamed the wolf and we made our dogs from the wolves and things like that. We are in awe of wolves. We want wolves to be us. We want us to be the wolves. We have this weird kindred spirit with wolves. We have a weird fascination with any fiction that has to do with werewolves. We have people who are over romanticizing werewolves. This is one thing that we're running into with cryptozoology that just frustrates the holy bejesus out of me all the time. You have people that over romanticize Bigfoot, the stinky thing that walks around in the forest, if it exists. And then, Dogman and every other thing that's out there, they just blow it completely out of proportion without any physical evidence or, anything to verify their story. I love their stories, and I think that they're probably telling the truth. But the thing about science is we have to have some evidence. But yeah, getting back on track with what you were asking as far as about the lion people, because I'll get off track and I'll just ramble for hours. As far as the lion people go, I remember reading about it. I read quite a bit about it, but I can't elaborate on it right now because it's just my brain's just gone blank on that one.
no, that's all great stuff, man. And as we come to an end here, one more question I basically just would like to hear your thoughts on is why do you think it is in all these cultures that they are mentioning the human headed animals and manifestations like that? Is it just because, again, us trying to understand things and maybe respecting that animal, past times where we don't necessarily as much now, but in our ancestral times, that's why we depicted it as that? Or do you think there's any sort of potential reasoning and fact to any sort of animal headed being across the world?
Oh, that's a very deep question, which would probably be a very huge answer. So there's a yes and a no to that. Um, I think humans have a sort of we have a need for gods, first of all. We have a need for these higher beings, whether it's aliens, cryptids, gods, demigods, demons, angels, whatever it is. We have a need for there to be both heroic beings with powers beyond ours and monsters for them to save us from. Um, we have a jealousy with animals that are in the wild who have claws, who have teeth, who have no morality, who don't have to worry about that, who can hunt down deer and tear it to shreds and feast on the meat and the blood, and it gets into sexuality and primal nature and everything else. So then we anthropomorphize everything. We have to take things and we have to make them look like us. If you look at, the UFOs and the aliens who are the most popular as far as in, culture are going to be the Greys. Well, the Greys look like us. Bigfoot, of course, looks like us. All of the cryptids that are really impressive look like us. The ghosts that are really talked about, like, or paranormal things, La Llorona, the Weeping Woman, the Woman in White, you have different, they're all like us. We need everything to look and be like us. So, even depictions of God are this old white man, who's strong, but, has this long white beard and sits on this throne, and just like Zeus is throwing thunderbolts down at us. So, yeah, there's kind of that need for that. As far as the reality behind it, now, once we get into Dogman, which I think is, in my honest opinion, is a horrible misnomer for whatever this creature is. Do I think it exists? Yeah, I think it probably does. Do I think it necessarily fits all of the descriptions that are always given? No, it probably doesn't. Eyewitnesses, we love eyewitnesses, we really do, but the fact of the matter is most people are really horrible eyewitnesses as far as recounting what they really saw and what they really experienced, not because they're horrible people, but because of what they were going through, the trauma they were going through, the adrenaline that was going through their system, and trying to recount everything that happened to them. If you've ever been in a traumatic experience and you try to recount that, first of all, everything seems to go in slow motion in your memory, even though nothing happened in slow motion. That's your brain trying to rationalize everything and to pick up as many details as it can. And your brain will fill in details that it didn't pick up. So eyewitnesses, unfortunately, aren't that reliable. We know that from police work. But could there be real creatures out there like the Dogman? Of course. So you and I have talked about this over and over. There are, and we'll continue to talk about it. There are a lot of reasons in the fossil record why there are possibilities for things like this. And just like you and I talked about in this show, with the oceans, we haven't discovered everything in the ocean. And we know for a fact, as cryptozoologists and as scientists, that we haven't necessarily understood everything about the creatures that are on land. And even as a scientist, I can say we don't really understand everything about reality. We understand what we can perceive through our five senses. Does that mean that there could be portals? Does that mean there could be other dimensions? Does that mean there could be more to reality than we understand? Absolutely. The problem is we need evidence. We don't just need Betty Sue telling us about, how she talks with, the dogmen that appear from planet W in the third galaxy away. We need actual evidence. We need something that I can hold up in court and I can say, here is the evidence. I need tracks, I need blood, I need hair, I need photographs that are clear and not fuzzy. I need evidence. So to answer your question, yes and no.
That's excellent, my friend. Well, thank you so much again for popping in tonight to hang out with us. And to the audience, yes, Robert is a bi-weekly host, so he will be back on very shortly. And at some point, I will be over on his thread as well. So all the links that you would like to check out will be in the description. And again, man, thanks for nerding out with us and, really expanding great knowledge, bro.
You know it, Starfox. I'd love to come on and nerd out with you guys. So everybody have a great night, and it's fun. And I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Thank you again to all you legends that did tune in tonight. for this episode of Midnight Lycanthropy. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share the truth. And I will see you very soon.